What we have tried to do when we look at public policy is to build on all the past consensus that's been derived in this building at the State Board of Education and so on with respect to the creation of statutes and administrative rules, and build on that past consensus, because a lot of hard work is done and it would be a shame to depart from all of that heavy lifting of your predecessors and colleagues. We also always have an eye toward what is it that is found in the best practices to optimize student learning and with our educational goals, and that we see the needs of all students in balance and not discretely focus on just a few at the expense of the many, that we look at public policy in terms of how all schools and all students benefit on balance, particularly considering resources and their scarcity. And so to do that, we look at the key elements of every policy, their impacts and the consequences, intended or otherwise. We assess what the fiscal impact will be, or if there's a revenue element, what that might look like. Compare it to existing programs that are on the books, the QEM goals, the Quality Education Model goals, as well as state education plans and values to ensure that there's compatibility with those concepts to that. And we determine the viability of any revenue sources that might be proposed to fund any fiscals that are associated with those programs or ideas. And also what impacts of funding or failure to fund, but passage without funding, means with respect to the commitments that we've already made in other service areas of education and how they might be impacted. And finally, we evaluate whether the idea advances our priorities as identified by the best practices in the Quality Education Model and the achievement goals that are associated with those best practices. So here's what it looks like. As you can see, we've done this in a sense of, from our perspective, what our assumptions are about priorities for spending the first new dollar that comes in the door, as I mentioned before. Under column A, you'll see program restoration. We've gone through years of devastating cuts. You'll hear more about that from one of my colleagues in a moment. And so as our economy improves, or as new initiatives might come forward on the revenue side, what would be the best use of resources? Well, the very first thing we would expect are that vital services in the education sector be restored. So if we've lost all the music teachers at Reynolds, for example, at the elementary level, and all the PE teachers and all the counselors, you would expect that that district would have an interest in restoring those programs before moving forward with new hires for new programs or new initiatives. And so the second element, of course, is the best practices that are found inside the Quality Education Model. We hear a lot, oh, Quality Education Model, we've got sticker shock because the overall total for doing a biennial full appropriation per the Constitutional Ballot Measure 1, passed in 2000, is out of reach. It was before the economic crisis. It's more so now. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the best practices that are found within it. That's how you get to the cost. It's the things that we know that work. Small class size, full day kindergarten, extra staffing to help students who are struggling, supports for those kids, professional development, everything you've heard this morning, frankly. So those are the elements of the QEM, and so it seems to us if that's the state's best practices, if that's what's in the Education Act for the 21st century, we ought to make sure that our policy proposals that come forward align with those at the very least. We also have, under column C, new laws and mandates passed with a later phase-in date. A couple examples of those are increased minutes of physical education as a combat to childhood obesity, school nursing ratio improvements, because Oregon's is one of the worst in the nation, and the new graduation standards, which came to us through the State Board of Education's actions. Finally, you would take that concept through Section D, new ideas beyond the Quality Education Model. This is not an argument about one partisan's idea versus another, or about status quo versus innovation. We just say that if there's something that's new, new itself does not necessarily mean better, particularly if there's not a research basis for new. So innovation, to the extent that it is just new and different, may not meet column B. But maybe it does, or maybe it builds on it, or maybe it is based on research that shows new discoveries about how children learn better. Well, then fine, if all these other things have come first, or if you have changed your policies in law otherwise, make sure that if there's a fiscal attached to it, that there's a funding source that's viable. So that's how we run through the policies. As you can see, you could do that with virtually any bill. This is how we structure it. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague.
Good morning. For the record, Tricia Smith, Oregon School Employees Association. Thank you for having us here this morning. We offer this guidance to you because it is our guidance. It is how we look at education policy measures that come forward, the good ideas that come forward to improve our education system. We absolutely believe Oregon is spot on in what it takes to provide a quality education for all of our students. And it's contained in the quality education model. That was a model that was developed with lots of time, lots of expertise, lots of research and data about what works, and a lot of money, frankly, in putting it together and keeping it updated. And we would encourage you always to keep that as your filter for new ideas that come forward about how to improve K-12 schools. The model will work. All the data shows that it will work. What we have to do is put the components within the model into our schools. And the model is our guide to do that in kind of a systematic, well-thought-out way, so that we don't inadvertently or accidentally deviate from what we know to be the best practices for a quality education with a new idea that we haven't run through this filter to determine how it fits with everything else we do. Our quality education model is, for us, the true expression of caseload in K-12 education. We hear a lot in this building about caseload. Well, for K-12, we have caseload. We have nearly 600,000 students, and we have a model which tells us how to provide them the best education they could possibly receive. And then we have legislative sessions every year or two where everything else that ever came into someone's head may come into your committee as a legislative concept. So what we encourage you to do is to remember that the quality education model is based on best practices. It's based on the best expertise in the field about what children need in school in order to achieve the goals that the legislature and the state have said are important for our children to achieve in K-12. We expect and we hope that you won't ignore the model and the components within it when you are looking at these new ideas. That's why we offered you the framework that we use when we're looking at new ideas, because we are totally committed to the high-quality education promised by the quality education model, and we don't want to deviate from it. We're delighted to add to it, to build it, to put all the components in our schools that exist in the model, and then to address those things that are not in the model. But all of those things need to be sequenced properly and appropriately in order for us to truly provide for our kids what we've all promised them.